So welcome to everyone to our CAES Codebreaker seminar. This is a monthly seminar series put on by CAES, the Center for Advanced Energy Studies, which is a consortium that brings together Idaho National Laboratory and all four of the public research universities of Idaho and Wyoming. So Boise State, Idaho State, University of Idaho, and University of Wyoming. On behalf of the entire leadership team at CAES, welcome. This is something that we do every month. If you have ideas on speakers, whether it's internal to the CAES community or external, please let Matt know. And I am very, very pleased to be able to share with you Duke Henningsen, who is our speaker today. He is at Idaho National Laboratory as the HPI lead practitioner for the Advanced Test Reactor, as well as a performance analyst. He recently received his master's degree in technology management from University of Idaho, one of our other members, where he also earned his bachelor's in industrial technology. He has an associate's degree in architectural drafting from Westwood College of Technology. And as far as path, his INL career began in 2009 when he was hired as a drafter for the Specific Manufacturing Capability, SMC, which is part of the INL National and Homeland Security Directorate. Duke then transferred to MFC, the Materials and Fuels Complex at INL, in 2011, where he worked as a drafter until transferring to ATR, Advanced Test Reactor, in 2014. So Duke has actually worked at 3 of the 5 directorates at CAES, at INL, which is very impressive. He's here today to talk about HPI, Human Performance Improvement Initiative, that's going on around the world right now. And he'll talk a little bit more about that. So over to you, Duke.
Thanks, Noelle. Let me take a moment to share my screen. And of course, let me stop sharing my screen because it grabbed the wrong one. I will share one more time. There we go. All right, let me get my presenter screen back to where I want it. And would someone just verify that they are seeing my starting screen that says Human Performance Improvement Rejuvenation at the Idaho National Laboratory?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome. I'm extremely honored that CAES actually reached out to me to give this presentation, and part of it was, as Noelle said, that I recently graduated with my master's in industrial or technology management through the University of Idaho. And part of what we're going to be discussing today is essentially based on my master's project. And as part of that, I had an opportunity to talk to Noelle with regards to human performance improvement and what that looks like for CAES. And so we'll kind of get into the aspects of my paper, but one of the things that I really want you guys to walk away with today, for those of you that are attending, is to hopefully walk away with a little bit more excitement of what human performance improvement is and how you might be able to incorporate that into how you're doing work, no matter what you're doing. Research, whether you're an operator, a drafter like I was. That's my hope with regards to what you can walk away with today. So let me move on to my objective slide. This is what we're going to be covering over the next hour. I'm going to try to honor our time and not go too much past 4:36. This topic is a passion of mine, and that's why I chose it kind of as a master's focus and really kind of my career path. So I can get excited and kind of go long on some subjects. So I'm gonna do my best. But these are our objectives today. I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction, which Noelle already gave most of what I was going to talk about. Then we're going to give you a brief background on what human performance is in general, because as Noelle said, this human performance improvement isn't specific to INL. This is something that is going on all over the world, and we'll talk about the history of human performance improvement. And then we will get into the rejuvenation efforts of human performance at the Idaho National Lab, give you a brief history on it, what really kind of created that need for change to rejuvenate what was already there. Then we'll talk about some of the key building blocks that really helped lead to our success with regards to the journey that we're on. Management support, identification of a lead and a core team, some of the pillars of success that are important when establishing a strong HPI culture within whatever organization or company you're with. And then one of the biggest things that we'll talk about that's helped contribute to the success that we've experienced is approaching error and error prevention and ingenuity with regards to how we perform work is the concept of failing safely or building a capacity for resilience. And then I'll talk just briefly about where we're at and what's the next step in our journey, because it is a journey. It's there is no destination, because performance improvement and process improvement is an ongoing thing and really never ends. So about me, yes, my name is Duke. However, my legal name is John Wayne Henningsen. My father is a big Western fan, so my mother went along with it because my grandfather's name is John. But I've been Duke ever since I was born, and I really love it. So yes, that is my real name. I have been at the lab, as Noel said, since 2009. I started up the specific manufacturing capability as a drafter, and then once they started kind of taking a decline in production, I transferred over to the materials and fuels complex and worked there as a drafter. And while I was working there, I was working on my undergrad in industrial technology, graduated in 2014, and got hired on as a performance analyst out at the Advanced Test Reactor. There I qualified as a root cause analyst, compliance officer. I was lessons learned coordinator, and for the last year and a half, I have been the HPI lead practitioner. So what that really means is that as events occur, specifically from a reactive position, is I'll go out and try to gather as much context and to where we can maximize the learning of things that we're going through, to where we can improve how we're doing work. But also taking the concept that I mentioned earlier of failing safely and building a capacity for resilience to be proactive with regards to how we're approaching and performance improvement in general, but how we as people, as humans, conduct our work and how we might be able to improve that. 3 degrees, associate's degree in architectural drafting that I earned out in Colorado. I am originally from Colorado, moved to Idaho in 2007, and while I was out there, I did earn my associates in architectural drafting, which kind of helped get me in the door to the lab. Have an industrial technology bachelor's, and just recently in May, didn't get to walk, didn't do anything, but I'm proud to hold that piece of paper for my master's in technology management. So, and one quick thing, I am a father of 4. And I've tried to manage the potential distractions that may occur today. I've got twin boys that just turned 12, a 6-year-old girl and a 3-year-old girl. My boys are pretty good, but might get some knocking on the door from one of my girls here. So I'm a proud father of 4 and been married almost 20 years, actually. Proud of that as well. So background on human performance. What I want to leave you with is just kind of a base understanding of what it is, if you're not already familiar with it, because it's important that we're kind of all on the same page. And human performance improvement is really kind of a philosophy, and it has some underlying principles that can be applied to anything that you're doing. And really, in what you're doing in life, you've probably already applied some of what we're going to be talking about to how you perform things already. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a patent for a rotative steam engine back around the Industrial Revolution. Now, if you notice by this diagram, there are a lot of exposed and moving parts that humans, as we started to design and improve how we are producing, that the humans were exposed to. Now, the Industrial Revolution was a revolution because we were really improving how we were producing, and that's the primary focus of the Industrial Revolution is let's produce more quickly, more efficiently. Now, when this rotative steam engine went into production, as an example of being creative and ingenuitive, it immediately replaced 20 head of horse for what the intended function of this was to be. Now, during that time, the humans, we as humans, were the primary interface, the last line of defense when interacting with these new machines. And the expectation was that you need to go out and be careful. Just go out and don't get hurt. And so we were the last line of defense in these particular in these scenarios. As another example, this was a playground back around 1900, and as you can see, it's not like our playgrounds today. The first time I looked at this particular picture, I see this kid right here. Can't see the cables that are attached to his swing, but I honestly thought that homeboy was falling. I'm like, man, they go out, be careful, and don't fall. Wonder how many kids fell from up here. And it was a sign of the time. Go out and be safe. Safety is your responsibility. Don't get hurt. So this was a big part. Again, it was production and not prevention. Now, when something occurred, when someone got trapped or caught in some piece of this particular rotative steam engine, the tendency was to go back to one of three corrective actions to help prevent it from happening again. For example, let's say someone was loading some coal into this furnace and they got burnt. We might go back to and say, you know what, he needs to be better trained on how to shovel coal into that furnace so he doesn't get burned. Or we might create some more procedures, some more paperwork associated with this particular activity. We're going to write it down so when people are shoveling coal into this furnace that they can only approach it from such a distance to ensure that doesn't happen, that person doesn't get injured. And you know what, if that doesn't work, we might fire the individual because obviously he can't understand and he's not trained. So we went to the big three: training, paperwork, procedure modification or introduction, or some sort of behavior modification for potentially correcting the issue, because a human was the problem. So as another example, kind of fast forward a little bit into World War II. We were during the time period of the war. We experienced in a 22-month period 457 crashes. And that's kind of an astounding number. Every time I look at it, that's a lot of crashes. We were at war, but most of these crashes were planes, B-17 specifically, coming in for landing. So we were looking at it and we're like, man, what's going on? These pilots, do we need to train them more? Are they unaware of how to fly this particular plane? Would a procedure help with, or modification of the procedure and to fly this particular plane? And you know what? If we did a procedure while landing, it might actually make things worse. Take for example, it says, while trying to land a plane, refer to section X of revision 14 of this particular procedure and identify the specific model of airplane that you are working with. And if it ends in 10 or lower, the levers are on the left-hand side of the cockpit and are set up as follows. It might actually create more problems. Would firing the pilot eliminate future events? If they happen to live through it, of course not. It wasn't really addressing the real issue. So after the war, the Air Force was really kind of curious as to what was going on. So they hired a guy by the name of Paul Fitts, and he was known as one of the Air Force's greatest minds, and he tackled some of the weird, strange problems. And as he dug into it and looked at original incident reports, it said, the human was a problem. It was pilot error. And it kept with kind of the times of the Industrial Revolution. And they were looking and said, perhaps this person should have never been flying a plane, or they should have been better trained. But as Fitz got into looking at it a little bit more, what he discovered, and the way he did this is he got inside the tunnel, so to speak, with these individuals, got down and really started talking with the pilots. He sat in the cockpits of these planes, and what he saw was more of a pattern than anything else. And instead of seeing pilot error, what he saw was design error. And what he discovered is that the controls for the landing gear to be deployed and the wing flaps were co-located and looked exactly the same. So what was occurring is that the pilots thought that they were reaching over to grab the landing gear, when in fact they were grabbing the wing flaps, which slowed their descent, which slammed them into the ground, and they were they were crashing their airplanes. So really, this is kind of the birth of human factors engineering. We were starting to look at the conditions that we were putting people in that provoke error, because the pilots weren't intending to do that. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second. We use the word error a lot, and I want to make sure that we're all kind of a common understanding of what error is. Now, typically when I ask folks how would you define error? Or if I brought one of my 6-year-old girl in here, how would you define error to her? And a lot of times what I hear is mistake, mess up, something along those natures, in that nature. If you look into the Department of Energy Human Performance Manual, they define error as an unintentional deviation from an expected behavior. No, we don't talk that way. I wouldn't bring my 12-year-old boy saying, you know what, that unintentional deviation from an expected behavior is not acceptable. So the way we like to define error, the way that I like to define error, is that an error is something that you don't intend to do. There's no intention in it. Now, if there's intention in something going against what's expected, it's really a violation and not an error. So when we experience errors, there's always an opportunity to learn. And looking back in this case, with pilots crashing planes, we can almost guarantee that those pilots did not intend to crash those planes into the ground. So what can we learn from this? And what they learned was the co-located controls looking exactly the same. And the solution to this was that they changed the shape of one of the knobs, so you could essentially be flying in the dark and know when you reach over to grab one of those handles that you are grabbing the right handle and that you're going to deploy your landing gear rather than deploying your flaps. So this is really kind of the birth of human factors engineering and trying to understand what conditions we're putting humans into that would provoke error, that would result in something that we don't want to happen. Fast forward a little bit further. This is 3 Mile Island. And as you can see, we've got water vapor coming off of Unit 1, but no water vapor coming off of Unit 2. March 28th, 1979, an equipment failure combined with some human errors started a domino effect that eventually led to the meltdown of Unit 2, of the Unit 2 reactor core. Now, there is so much information and so much to learn from this particular event that I'm not going to get into many details, but this was really kind of a turning point with regards to really putting some emphasis and trying to have a deeper understanding with regards to the conditions that we put humans in and what that means. So, from this event was birthed the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And as you can see by their mission statement, it is to promote the highest levels of safety and reliability, to promote excellence in the operation of commercial nuclear power plants. Now, the design of nuclear power plants was really to help, the intent was to design the plants to protect itself from the human. And what we to protect the human from the plant, so to speak. And when things occur, things would shut down and we would be in a good order. But humans, we are the most important asset to any system. But often we are the most unreliable in certain situations because we're all fallible. So with this change, with this focus on human performance, it became, okay, protect the plant from the people and not protect the people from the plant. So how can we improve performance at specific areas to help us perform better as expected at very critical and important junctures as we perform our duties? So 98, 99 time frame in the commercial nuclear industry, there was a study done and looked at industry events due to human performance. And as you can see, there's a lot of different categories that these events were binned into. And if you look at the biggest one, if someone were to come to you and say, tell me what my biggest issue is so I can go address it. What this indicates is that 32% of the industry events that occurred in that time frame were related to human error, work practices, people performing work. However, if we look at the rest of the categories that these events were bent into, we've got change management, human-machine interface, human factors engineering, procedure, written procedure is the next biggest one. What about the procedure that contributed to this? And if you lump all of these together, what these really are the organizational influences that really affect how we are performing work. So understanding this is very important to understanding the context and the environments that we find ourselves in and what's influencing us when specific errors are made. So this slide is a reflection of the previous bar chart that I had showed you. These are all industry events in that time frame. 20% wasn't reflected in the bar chart because they were entirely equipment failures. But of that 80%, if you look over on the right-hand side at the bigger pie chart, 70% of what we're looking at, and it reflected back to the organizational aspects of how errors and why errors were made, lead to what is called as latent organizational weaknesses. And these are these weaknesses, such as weaknesses in procedures that can provoke error. And that 30% of those are related to some sort of individual contribution. So the previous belief, getting back to kind of the Industrial Revolution, and what was the common belief there is that it was human error was the problem to be fixed. We need to fix the person. But based on this information, we learned that job site conditions shape and influence worker behaviors. To say it another way, is that we can't change the human condition, but we can change the conditions that we put the human in. We can predict what those error-likely situations are going to be, and we can manage those. And I'll touch on that again in just a moment. So really, the purpose is to be proactive to prevent the consequences of error, those unwanted outcomes triggered by when we make a mistake. And we're going to make them. As an example, how many of you, looking at your USB cables that we've got all around us, have ever tried to plug in one of these bad boys backwards? I can almost guarantee you that some of you, every time you try to put one of these in, like myself, put it in backwards or upside down or however you say that. By definition, looking back at our definition of an error, that's something that you didn't intend to do, right? But the consequences have been negated based on the defenses that have been put into this, such as that little plastic piece that's a forcing function that prevents the consequences of an error. So it's those significant consequences that we don't want to occur that we're really, really focusing on being proactive about when we make errors and creating the capacity for resilience. And creating the capacity for resilience is important around those points that the consequences of an error could be significant. So I keep saying unwanted outcomes. The top three that are typically looked at across many industries is injury. We want to keep people safe. It's often said that we want to send, the company wants to send people home in the same or better condition than they came to work in. We don't want injuries to occur. Those are significant consequences, significant unwanted outcomes. But some other big ones are mission interruption. Thinking of commercial nuclear power, is that if an error occurs, might not result in an injury, but results in shutting down the reactor. That's a significant mission interruption, and could, if it's commercial nuclear reactor, could cost millions of dollars depending on how long they're down. Or the third big one is damage to some important piece of equipment, facility, vehicles. So these are the big three, and they're not all inclusive. And unwanted outcomes, what I encourage you here is that as you're performing work, think of that kind of worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could happen in this particular case? And what are my defenses that I have in place that are going to help prevent that from happening? And we'll touch more on that as well. So last part of just the basic HPI background is that there are 5 principles. Now, principles are important to kind of understand about this because it kind of goes along with the philosophy. Because the philosophy and the principles can, again, be applied to anything that you're doing. Researcher, drafter, surgeon, nuclear operator, anybody can apply these principles to what they're doing. Number 1 is that we are fallible. We're going to make mistakes. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when those errors occur, what resilience, what capacity for resilience have we built around us to where it prevents those unwanted outcomes? Now, understanding that we're fallible takes us into principle number 2, that these error-likely situations. Now, error-likely situations is a phrase that I like to explain a little bit, because there are these conditions that exist typically that influence how we might be performing. Specifically right now, I talked about my kids potentially being distractions. One of the and that's an influencing factor on how I'm performing here, because I want to perform well here, so I'm communicating well, that I don't get hung up and come back and forget my train of thought. I had a little brief with them saying, okay, guys, I'm going to be starting my presentation. Let's try to keep it down. If you have any questions, go talk to mom, and we can talk about it afterwards. It's a condition that I was aware of, and I predicted that it could potentially happen. And then I managed it to help prevent those error-likely situations. And what we call those are error precursors. Those are those conditions that exist before an error happens. And when we are aware of those, we can then manage those. And I could give a whole hour-long class on error precursors. But when we are intentional about how we're performing work, we can identify those, predict those error-likely situations, and then build controls and defenses around that to prevent an error from occurring to begin with, and perform well. Number 3, individual behavior is influenced by organizational processes and values. Now, when I think of this, I think of the fact that no matter where you're at, in your workplace, that there are organizational processes that you are performing work to, and there are values that you are performing work to. One of the and processes change. For example, I was talking with Noel about this just briefly before we started this presentation, is that normally through these Codebreaker presentations, everybody gets together in a room and we have a live conversation. Right now, I can't see anybody's face. I can't see anybody's body language. So this is very much of a process change, and this can really kind of influence my individual behavior. So being aware of those processes and how processes change and how it can influence our behavior can lead us to identifying what we need to do to kind of help contribute to what's expected, and understanding our part in that as well, and how we influence others, which really kind of gets to principle number 4. People achieve high levels of performance based largely on encouragement and reinforcement received from leaders, peers, and subordinates. And this talks about, this is culture, essentially. Is that, how is the culture within your organization? Are you encouraging to one another? Are you identifying what you need to do? Are you talking about what you need to talk about? Identifying challenges and roadblocks and celebrating success. Is that we are highly influenced, whether we like it or not sometimes, by the people that surround us. And again, we have a part in that as well. How are we encouraging and reinforcing others to achieve high levels of performance? And then number 5 is events. Those things that you don't want to occur, those unwanted outcomes, can be avoided by understanding the reasons errors occur, learning about those, and applying those lessons learned from those events, from past events. Are you going into a particular work activity where someone has done something similar in the past? How can you bring up the lessons there and apply some key lessons learned to how you're going to be moving forward to be effective and achieve those high levels of success and performance with what you are doing? So learning from the past is absolutely is essential. And as I said, an error is something that you don't intend to do, and when that is the case, there's always an opportunity to learn. For instance, I might not learn much from trying to stick a USB in backwards, but if I get into a car accident, you can be sure that there are tons of lessons learned that I can take from that and learn and apply to how I'm going to perform as a driver in the future. So that's the background of HPI. So to get into what we've been doing at INL is really kind of, again, this was part of my master's paper as an University of Idaho student. And what I did is kind of come in as a project and kind of capture the information and apply some of my studies and research that I've done to be part of kind of the core team that kind of helped with this rejuvenation effort. Now, if you think of the word rejuvenation as in the word itself, it means that there's something there that needs some life put into it to make it useful again, to rejuvenate it, to bring it back to what it's intended to be. And that's what really kind of occurred. Now, a brief history of human performance at the Idaho National Lab. Now, as mentioned in Noel's introduction, INL is very diverse in its strategic areas. The overall INL mission is to discover, demonstrate, and secure innovative nuclear energy solutions and clean energy options, as well as critical infrastructure. So there are a lot of areas. INL is huge. If you're not aware, it's 890 square miles, its footprint. We got the Advanced Test Reactor, we've got the Materials and Fuels Complex, we've got the Specific Manufacturing Capability, which is a cool place because they build armor for the Army and their tanks. And you've got, biofuel studies and a lot of different things going on there. So it's very diverse, very large. Now, prior to 2018, HPI had been introduced in the past, and there was some strong movement, and then it eventually just kind of lost momentum. And the primary reason is that there was a significant lack of management support there. However, as described with regards to kind of the birth of human performance improvement with the events that occurred at 3 Mile Island, there are certain situations that are certain work activities, such as nuclear power ops or nuclear operations at ATR, where it's just kind of embedded into the culture. So there's pockets of excellence that remained just due to the culture that existed. And during these waning years, there was a working group that maintained consistent meeting to try to find ways to integrate the philosophy and principles of human performance into the work, planning, and execution processes. So it never really kind of disappeared, but it needed a rejuvenation. So why the need? Why the sudden need for change with regards to rejuvenation? So prior to 2018, there were some significant events that rose to the concern of senior management and the Department of Energy. Now, the lab is a Department of Energy site run by the Battelle Energy Alliance and several other contractors. So they were concerned with some of these events that were occurring. And with that resulted several lab-wide assessments, a common cause analysis that identified deficiencies in human performance. Now, at about the same time, there was interest in the development of a core group, and I will get to that in just a moment. But the senior management asked this core group to go look at these same events strongly from a human performance perspective. Now, with human performance, it's very context-rich. And without context, understanding the full environment, the conditions that the people are living in at the time that something happens, we can miss the big picture. So the request was to have that HPI core team go look at the same events, focusing on it heavily from a human performance perspective. And this really was a catalyst for kicking off these rejuvenation efforts, and hence the journey began. Now, rejuvenation of HPI at INL, the building blocks. Now, the gentleman off to the right, that is Shane Bush, and I'll get to him in just a moment. But the primary reason why we've seen success at INL, and these same principles can be applied to if you're really looking at integrating an HPI culture, a strong HPI culture in your particular work organizations, is understanding that management needs to understand its value. And we had that. We had that from the very top. Dr. Peters supported it, and to the point where we had an off-site half day for over 300 managers and supervisors. Significant time, significant amount of money spent to really kind of help kick that off and move it. The second big building block is to identify somebody that is knowledgeable and experienced with regards to how to take what needs to be taken with regards to the philosophy and principles of HPI and integrate it into work organizations. And we had that. fortunately, in Shane Bush. Shane Bush is an INL employee, but also he is an internationally known expert in human performance, and he's taught all over the world and consulted with a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries. So he was approached, and he came back and led the effort. But also, equally important in my mind is the identification of a core team. And that core team, fortunately, we had some individuals that had that were highly familiar with the philosophy, principles, and concepts, and that's important. And if you don't have those within your organization, it's important to go out and seek those and talk to folks that are familiar with it, so you can identify the right people to help integrate this into your work organizations. So 2 people were identified. The gentleman that had kept HPI alive in the waning years, he was identified. He was highly familiar, highly knowledgeable with HPI. And then another individual that had worked in several parts of the lab, that was really had earned a high level of respect as a subject matter expert in HPI, was asked to be part of that core team as well. And they were kind of the nucleus, so to speak. And then there were some other key players that kind of came in and supported. They weren't part of the core team, so to speak, but they really supported to make this effort successful. And then and how I got involved is that part of the success there were embedded HPI lead practitioners at INL. They're mission centers, but they could really be organizations, depending on where you're at, that in any large organization, you're going to have the overall culture of the particular area, but you're also going to have the areas, micro cultures within certain organizations. So having someone identified within those particular groups, they act as a interpreter or a translator of sorts when questions arise with regards to how to effectively integrate HPI into your work processes. Because research is different than nuclear operations, then it's different from engineering, then it's different from drafting, that's different from the hospital work and surgery. So having somebody that understands it, that can really kind of help act as that translator, really contributed to our success at the INL. Now, building blocks. Pillars of another one is having the pillars of success that were established from the beginning with Shane and the core team. Was we needed a strong knowledge base. And with this came some training, some redevelopment of some training to reestablish a baseline for what it means. What is human performance improvement? What is the philosophy? What are the principles? So there was an introduction class that was already in place, but it got revamped and brought down to 2 hours. And it's really a high-level introduction, a lot of what I talked about at the beginning of our presentation here, to give you a base level understanding and a common mindset across those who are applying this with the principles and understanding what human performance is. The second class, and these are the 2 classes that are pushed most heavily because they provide the most value, is the tool use class. Now, we'll get into tools in just a moment, because that is another pillar of success. But this is really kind of an introductory to how to identify specific tools and then integrate them into your work processes. Then there is a class for managers and supervisors. It's a full day, and that's really kind of intended to give managers and supervisors a deep level understanding of what HPI is, so they can best be equipped to best support the integration of HPI into work processes within their particular group. And then another one that I think is equally important, because we have things that are going on that need to be evaluated and understood so we can maximize learning, is a class that was developed for cause analysts and critique leads. Now, a critique at the lab is that when an event occurs, we get people that are involved with it together with someone who follows a process and understands how to ask questions to gain the most context and understanding of both the facts and the context. What we did with this particular class was to really emphasize gathering the context, understanding those error precursors that may have existed, being able to identify some of the latent weaknesses that may have existed, so we can maximize our learning and we can ultimately improve how we are performing. And the same principle applied for how cause analysts are performing their work. Going out, gathering facts, but also paying specific attention to the context involved so we can maximize their learning and identify really what needs to be identified to improve how we're doing work. Now, pillar of success number 2, tools. Now, a tool is not a tool is not a tool. A crescent wrench, specifically, it has some flexibility with regards to adjustment on how to turn, for turning nuts specifically. But a crescent wrench is not a hammer, even though we may have used it as one before. I know I have. But understanding how to use specific tools. I think of the nail gun that I have out in my garage. I had never used a nail gun before, so when I purchased it, I spent some time learning how to use it because an error while using a nail gun could result in some significant injury. Nail through the hand, nail through the foot, who knows? But it's intended for a very specific function. And so it goes for HPI tools, and there's a big list of them. What I have listed here are just some of the ones that are focused on, particularly at where I work at the Advanced Test Reactor, for how to improve work. Pre-job brief, like I did with my 2 boys. It's like, all right, we're getting ready to do work. Please be aware of this and don't distract me. I even put a sign on the outside of my door that says "Do not disturb." And what these pre-job briefs are intended to do is talk about the known hazards. What are the critical steps? And I'll talk about critical steps here in just a little bit. Are you ready to perform work? That's a very specific job, so everybody's aware of what needs to be done. And in a pre-job brief, you might actually discuss what other tools you might be able to use to help you execute and build resilience at specific points in your work evolution. Take 2 for safety. This is simply a job site walk down. Once you leave the pre-job brief, you go out to your work location. Take 2 minutes. Is everything as you expected it? If it is, continue with work, but then also address the unexpected, because those are unforeseen potential hazards that exist. 3-way communication. Communication is huge, specifically when something needs to be performed in a very specific way to get a very specific outcome. And 3-way communication has 3 parts. It's a sender, a receiver, and then the sender again. Sender sends a piece of information, the receiver repeats it back, and the sender confirms or denies that what they heard back from the receiver is accurate. And they do that until it's 4-0, to where it's good, because if there's a misunderstanding and an error could occur, we don't want that. So intentional use of 3-way communication can be effective, especially when working with others. Procedure use and adherence is a tool. Well, a lot of what we do, a lot of what we may be developing even. We might be developing procedures as a researcher to help others perform a specific aspect of work. How are we building those procedures? How are we executing those procedures to where we're getting to where we need to be as expected, and not introducing errors of that could be potential misinterpretations or be misunderstood. So procedure use and adherence is a big one, because we perform a lot of work to it, but also having the mindset that when those areas of the procedure are confusing, that we need to stop. We need to take a moment and say, okay, this is unclear, and exercise. And one of the tools that's not on here is a questioning attitude. And a questioning attitude is, if something doesn't feel right, say something about it. Continue to ask questions until that feeling of uneasiness goes away. All right, peer check and self-check. I'm going to talk about self-check real quick. Self-check is basically a tool designed for when you are highly familiar with a particular work activity. And you can rely on your own knowledge, training, and understanding to get to where you need to be. And there's an acronym that we like to use called STAR, and it's stop, take a moment, stop, observe what you need to do, think about what the action you're going to take, walk through it, mentally rehearse it, act upon it, and then review it. Okay, I need to turn valve A, 3/4 of a turn. All right. Going to turn valve A 3/4 of a turn, turn it, and come back and say, you know what, I missed where I turned that, and ensure that you've turned it all the way. Now, peer check, all peer check is just 2 people doing a self check at the same time. So I could go on again forever on this one, but tools are very important to understand. Now, when you understand your tools, you can have a better idea and better sensitivity to when you might be able to insert those into your particular work activities to help you get to where you need to be, either error-free or consequence-free. Reduce the consequences of an error. Another pillar is integration. Part of that is the level of knowledge and understanding, and that really kind of gets back to training, is to integrate it effectively. People need to know what they need to know to integrate it. They need to understand the philosophy, understand the principles, understand the concepts, and understand the tools. And part of the integration pillar is points of contact. I talked about the success of identifying a point of contact within the individual areas that the folks were working. This was a huge point of integration, and that contributed to our success. And then another point of integration that has created some success is being intentional about it. Develop a plan. You know, we out at the Advanced Test Reactor, we have a plan that we go over every year, sit down and think about and analyze where we were at last year with regards to what we wanted to achieve, and create a new plan. Identify expectations for who's going to support this effort, identify who's going to lead this effort, your HPI lead practitioners, and then develop some actions. And you can say, this is what we're going to address. We want people trained to this. We want people to have this level of understanding. And then, you know what, maybe you get to a point where everybody's being trained. You want some continuing training. Identify those areas to where you can grow your knowledge and understanding. And then the last pillar that was initially part of this rejuvenation effort was a just culture. Now, a just culture is, again, not something that's not specific to INL. This is something that is really discussed everywhere. And there is a gentleman by the name of Sidney Dekker that has written a lot of books on human performance. When I was referring to kind of being inside the tunnel, he wrote a book on being inside the tunnel and then seeing things from outside the tunnel. But he wrote a book on just culture. And I want to quote him. And he says that a just culture is a culture of trust, learning, and accountability. A just culture is particularly important when an incident has occurred, when something has gone wrong. How do you respond to the people involved? How do you minimize the negative impact and maximize learning? The primary purpose of a just culture to most is to give people the confidence to report safety issues, because then people know that the organization will respond fairly. A just culture should enable your organization to learn from an incident, yet also hold people accountable for undesired performance. So the whole aspect of just culture was initially addressed, and what was done by the core team was to integrate it into our HR process. Now, if you get out onto the internet and look up culpability tree, you'll find a tree that takes an aspect of an event and kind of takes you through a bunch of questions that kind of get you to an endpoint with regards to understanding what, the intent of what occurred. And what we and the HPI core team did was take that and really kind of change some of the language to ensure that a just culture was occurring by using that tree. So when with integration of HPI and things happen, sometimes it gets into the HR process, and they are now using that just culture tree to go through what they need to. So right now, the just culture is not being focused on heavily as an HPI aspect, but it is also very important to regards to helping create additional success, because when people are comfortable to report safety issues or organizational issues, they'll know that the organization is going to respond fairly, and then you can address what needs to be addressed. So, rejuvenation, concept of failing safely and building a capacity for resilience. How many of you have ever seen this? How many of you have ever done this? I personally have never done it, but I've talked to a handful of people that have. And if you think about this and you're aware of it, this little, the bulby end down on the end of this hose, what was occurring is that people were driving off with these hoses, and it was creating some significant issues with regards to these gas pumps. So when we can anticipate that an error is going to occur, like we have been, like we discussed, how are we going to deal with that when it happens? We can't, maybe we send somebody out to pump gas for somebody and we ensure that it's taken out. And there for a while, and I think Oregon is no longer doing this, and that you can pump your own gas in Oregon now. But this is going to happen. So to anticipate that, there are quick disconnect features on those gas hoses. So when somebody drives off with a gas hose in their tank, because of many reasons that can contribute to that. Maybe they were, onto the hospital because wife's in labor. First-time driver and having pumped the gas for the first time and unaware, or on their cell phone, talking to their friends. A lot of different things could contribute to why this occurred, but the fact of the matter is that it's going to happen. So to build some resilience around that disconnect feature was developed. And now you can drive back to the gas station and say, I drove off with your hose. And they're like, yeah, I know. They take it and go plug it back in, and all is fine. So resilience, that's a resilient system, understanding that errors are going to occur. And the consequence there is that they simply out a hose for a little bit until they can reconnect it. So what is resilience? If we look at resilience just as a word and look at the definition, resilience is the ability to recover from something quickly when something goes wrong or you experience some sort of challenge. Now, the capacity for resilience is the organization's ability to manage defenses and controls to prevent unwanted outcomes triggered by human error. Those unwanted outcomes being injury, mission interruption, and damage. But the big part of that is, okay, where do we apply that? How do we do this? What do I need to really be paying attention to? Now, in our work processes, doesn't matter what you're doing, there may be critical or risk important steps. Now, a critical step in a work process, in a work evolution, are those actions that are within the control of an individual and typically irreversible, and that when an error occurs, when you do it wrong, it could result in an unwanted outcome. Simple example: take a pistol, a firearm, for example. Once that trigger is pulled, there's no pulling back the slug or the projectile that comes out of the end of that barrel. There's no taking it back. That's a critical step. But not every process is going to have a critical step. Might have a risk important step. Procedure, step, or action that when performed incorrectly could have a negative impact on the overall process. Might not necessarily result in an unwanted outcome, injury, mission interruption, or damage. But it could slow it down to where you're late on your deliverable. Doesn't affect mission, but you're late. So how do we build resilience there? These critical and risk important steps are important to a process because we need to perform them in an expected way to get our desired outcome. Now, thinking of risk important steps and critical steps, let's take, for example, skydiving. The critical step in the skydiving process is really jumping out of the airplane. Once you jump out of the airplane, you can't get back into the airplane. That's the critical step. A risk important step in that particular scenario, in that particular process, is packing your parachute in a very specific way so when you go to deploy it, it does what it's supposed to. Now, if you do something in error with regards to that can be discovered and identified and reversed. And so, but it's still very risk important because it leads up to a critical step of jumping out of the airplane. Because if an error is done here and you jump out of an airplane at the critical step and your chute's not going to do what it's intended to do, you're in bad space. So it's important to kind of understand the resilience that we have built in there. What are the defenses and controls that we have at risk important steps for packing a parachute? Have a peer check. Have someone come over and check it. What are the critical steps that we have when jumping out of the airplane? Make sure that everything that you need to get on the ground safely is in the condition that you expect it prior to jumping out of the airplane. A check, a self-check, a peer check. What tool can you incorporate there? So this was developed with regards to how do we assess our resilience and capacity for resilience at those steps that are typically irreversible and could result in an unwanted outcome, or the risk important steps. So As resiliency increases in this particular table, so does our capacity to manage human error. Kind of thinking back to principle number 1, I think is important here, is that we're all fallible, we're all going to make mistakes. So at the low end of resiliency, at a critical or risk important step, if we are dependent on us as humans to not make an error, it's only a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, the chances of making an error on something that you are highly familiar with is pretty low. It's about 1 in 10,000. However, the likelihood of it happening is still there. And if an unwanted outcome, injury, mission interruption, or damage could occur, and we're depending on the person to not make an error, we need to evaluate that and say, okay, what can we do to increase our resilience there? Going up the scale just a little bit, increasing resiliency and managing our capacity for error is to integrate a tool or integrate some sort of personal job aid, checklist, label, sign, something that's going to indicate to you that as you step into a specific task, hey, be aware of this. You need to make sure that you perform it in this particular sequence. Or you're entering into an area that's a high hazard area. Ensure that you have your hard hat on. A sign, a checklist, a job aid. Moving up the resiliency scale a little bit more. A sensory warning device, some sort of visual delineated boundary, a line on the floor. As soon as you cross that line, you are at greater risk of being injured because the hazards associated within that particular area. A sensory warning device. If you're doing a particular research project and there's a door to a cabinet on a machine that you're using, and it's important that that door stay closed, maybe you integrate a device that when you open that door, an audible alarm occurs. But if you want to increase your resiliency a little bit more, if it's absolutely critical that that door stay closed, you add some sort of temporary barrier to where it locks it. So even if you do make an error and try to open that door, it's preventing the consequence from occurring. And then some sort of permanent barrier intended to prevent the consequences entirely at those critical steps. And a good example of that, if you just think of your garage doors at home, the laser across the bottom, as that door is closing, anything crosses that path, a child, an animal, that's going to sense and then kind of revert. That's a permanent barrier that's designed to protect the users of that particular door. So to kind of further illustrate that particular example, where'd it go? There we go. Think of railroad crossings specifically. It's my transitions aren't working. So if you think of railroad crossings, if we are entirely dependent on a person for conducting crossing a railroad track, you might cross a railroad track that has no signs at all. To increase it a little bit more, you might be approaching a railroad crossing that simply has the cross arms that says it's a railroad crossing. Increase it up a little bit more to some sort of sensory warning device. It's a railroad crossing that has the flashing lights and a bell, perhaps. Increase it a little bit more, it's approaching a railroad crossing that has the arms that drop to prevent cars from going across. And a permanent barrier to completely eliminate the possibility of a car, a vehicle, and a train interacting with one another is an overpass or an underpass for that particular track. You're eliminating the possibility altogether. We'll watch it come up now. Yeah, there we go. All right. So depends on people, no signs, a little bit more resilience, a sign, visual auditory device, arms crossing, and then a bridge. So a real basic example of how to increase that resilience at specific steps. So that's been a huge influencing factor with the success that we've had with regards to the rejuvenation efforts, because the capacity for resilience can be integrated into any and all jobs, no matter where you're at, what you're doing. It's a matter of understanding your critical and risk important steps, assessing your resilience, making a determination if that's adequate. If it's not, how can you raise it to the highest reasonable level that's agreed upon by all the stakeholders, and say, you know what, I think we can perform well here with some sort of sensory warning device, and not take it. The goal isn't to take it all the way up to the permanent barrier. It's to take it from where it is, if that's not acceptable, to the highest level that's reasonably achievable. That's really the goal here, to where it gets you thinking about how you are managing your hazards and managing your resilience at those critical and risk important steps. So that's really kind of some of where we're at on this journey so far. Like I said, it's a journey. So what's next for us? The pillars have been established. The identification of leads has happened. There is a core team that's knowledgeable and has the expertise needed. Now we're setting in our heels and saying, okay, we need to establish a baseline and do a little bit of an assessment to see where we might mature. So that's really kind of phase 2. And again, the journey may reveal some things that we need to change or improve, but that's where we're at. So let's see. Did we cover our objectives? Talked about myself a little bit, gave you a brief background on HPI, the rejuvenation efforts at HPI, gave you kind of where we were at, why we needed to change, talked about the building blocks. Management support is huge. Identification of a lead and core team, talking about the foundational pillars to what created some success, and then part of the success that was created behind approaching how we do work. Researchers, engineering, documents, nuclear operations with regards to creating a capacity for resilience. And then we talk next where we're at. So that is my presentation. I will open it up for comments and questions now. And thanks Monica. I'm glad it comes through because I am passionate about it. This is something that I do have a lot of passion for and believe in. And it's fun. I enjoy what I do, and I get to learn a lot, actually. Okay. Enjoy this. How are the core teams going to be developed? Have they already been determined? The core team was Shane Bush and the two other individuals. But with regards to identification of the leads at the mission centers, that is something that the trickle down effect with regards to management support from the top has actually helped contribute to where certain mission centers and groups are being intentional about identifying individuals to be part of what's called there's kind of two different groups. There's the ATR, or not the ATR, the INL HPI working group, where if people are interested, they can come in, be part of the conversation of what's occurring with regards to HPI at the lab, and then identify people to potentially be those lead practitioners at the different mission centers. So it's really having active management involvement to identify someone who would be a good fit for that position. Who provides the training on just culture? That would be Shane in the core group as well. Anita, thank you. This was a very clear and concise presentation. I covered topics and made it very interesting. I appreciate that. That was my goal. Like I said, my goal from the beginning was to really hope that as you kind of listened to what was going on and you kind of understood the large application of what human performance and the philosophy and the principles can do for whatever you're doing, then it might spark an interest for you with regards to how you might incorporate it, if you're not already, into what you're doing, whatever it may be. Thank you, Anita. All right, any others?
All right, nice job, Duke. So you guys who are listening in, next month we'll have Alan Carr. He's a historian at Los Alamos National Lab. He's going to talk about the Manhattan Project. So stay tuned for some information about that. But yeah, appreciate it, Duke.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody.
Looks like you got one more question.
Yep, we do got one more. Who's the best person to contact to get the training? It says Idaho Falls, so I'm not sure if you're an INL employee or not. But the best person to contact for that particular, okay, INL, yes, good. I would reach out to Brandy Young. It's Brandy with a Y. .young at INL.gov. She'd be able to provide you with some better information on how to receive that training. Because my guess is that you might have to go through your training coordinator, but she'll be able to fill you in on what needs to be done there. So Brandy.young at INL.gov.